Some believe that there was an alien figure there and that this is captured on film.
Kodak could not find a single thing wrong with the photograph. No fake, no double exposure, no trick of the light. The negative was genuine. That was the problem, because the photograph showed a spaceman standing behind a 5-year-old girl on an empty English marsh, and the man who took it swore nobody was there. For 60 years, the case beat everyone who tried it. The police, the newspapers, the UFO hunters, even the professor who solved most of it in 2012. Every explanation died at the same detail: the helmet. The answer was hanging in the sky the whole time.
So as Jim Templeton headed to the marsh, the only thing out of the ordinary he noticed was that the animals, the sheep and the cows that were there, were huddled together and acting frightened. But of what?
Jim Templeton took a series of 3 photographs of his daughter on a single lens reflex camera. On 2 of the photos, nothing unusual was seen, but on the middle picture, what seems to be a strange figure, white clad and wearing some sort of spacesuit and helmet, is visible in the background. In 1964, a case like this was gold dust. Lots of people had a story, but very few people actually had their story backed up with a picture. This really does look like something either from a sci-fi movie or real cutting-edge technology.
Skeptics have said that the creature wasn't really a creature, it was a beekeeper in a beekeeping outfit, right? With a mask and protective garments and stuff. But if it's a beekeeper, and Templeton, as he said, reeled off those 3 photos in succession, how could a beekeeper appear in the middle photo, but not in the first 2? It makes no sense.
Nowadays, we're used to the idea that it's easy to fake a photograph with computer programs. Back in 1964, it was a very different story. Indeed, authorities at Kodak, who made the film, were sent this and were asked, is this a fake? They came back and said, no, we see no evidence of any trickery here.
On the 23rd of May, 1964, Jim Templeton took his family out for the day. He was a fireman from Carlisle, in the north of England. He had his wife Annie, his 2 young daughters, and a camera he liked to use when he had the time. They drove out to Burgh Marsh, a stretch of grassland that looks over the Solway Firth. That water forms part of the border between England and Scotland. The marsh was quiet. Jim later said the only other people out there were 2 old women sitting in a car at the far end of the grass. His 5-year-old Elizabeth was wearing a brand new dress. She was proud of it. So Jim did what any father with a camera would do. He asked her to pose while she picked flowers, and he took 3 photos in a row. Nothing seemed wrong at the time. He dropped the film at the chemist to be developed, the way everyone did back then. A week later, he came back for the prints. The first photo was fine. The 3rd was fine. The middle one was the problem. The chemist had spotted it before Jim did. Behind Elizabeth, rising up out of the grass, stood a figure in what looked like a white spacesuit. It had a helmet. It had a dark visor where a face should be. It was turned slightly away, and it towered over the little girl in the front of the shot. Jim was certain of one thing. When he pressed the shutter, there was no one behind his daughter. He knew that the marsh was empty. He had watched it with his own eyes. And yet here was a print, straight from the negative, with a spaceman standing in the background of his daughter's photo. So he sent it to the experts. Jim mailed the negative to Kodak, the company that made the film. He wanted them to prove it was a fake. A double exposure, a smudge, a trick of the chemicals, anything. Kodak looked closely and came back with an answer he did not expect. The print matched the negative exactly. There was no tampering. Whatever stood behind Elizabeth had been there when the light hit the film. That answer changed everything, because now it was not one nervous father with a strange photo. It was a genuine image, confirmed by the biggest film company on Earth, showing something nobody could explain. Jim took it to the police next. They examined it, decided it was not a police matter, and sent him on his way. His last stop was the local newspaper, and that is where the whole thing exploded. The Cumberland News put the Spaceman on its front page. Within days, the story left Carlisle and kept going. Newspapers picked it up. Magazines ran it. Television stations across the world showed the photo of the little girl and the figure behind her. This was 1964, the height of the space race, and the timing could not have been better. People were staring at the sky and wondering who else was up there. A photo of an apparent astronaut on a lonely English marsh fit the mood perfectly. Then the visitors arrived. Jim said two men in dark suits came to his home not long after the story broke. They claimed to be from the British government. They did not give names. They introduced themselves only as number 9 and number 11, and they wanted Jim to drive them out to the exact spot where he took the photo. He did. Standing on the marsh, they pressed him on what he had seen that day. When Jim told them the truth, that he had seen no figure at all when he pressed the shutter, the two men reacted badly. According to Jim, they left the marsh in a hurry and never came back. Whoever they were, they did not like his answer. The story only grew from there. Around the same time, engineers in Australia were preparing to test a rocket called the Blue Streak. The test was happening at Woomera, a firing range in South Australia. As the story goes, technicians there aborted a launch after two of them reported seeing figures standing in the range where nobody should have been. Then those same technicians saw Jim's photo. They said the figure looked like the ones they had seen near their rocket. That detail set the whole thing on fire, because the Blue Streak missile had been built at a base in Cumbria, close to the very marsh where Jim took his picture. A spaceman near an English rocket, and matching figures near an Australian one. For believers, that was no coincidence. Kodak fed the frenzy too. The company offered a prize to anyone who could prove the photo had been faked. The reward was a year of free film and developing. It was cheap advertising, and it worked, because now amateur detectives all over the country were trying to break the case. The prize was never claimed, and to a lot of people, that empty prize was proof the photo could not be explained. The theories piled up. Some said Jim had caught an alien on film. The ship and its crew had been hidden by a cloaking device, they argued, invisible to the human eye but not to the camera. That explained why Jim saw nothing and the film saw everything. It made no scientific sense, but it made emotional sense. And in 1964, that was enough. Jim received thousands of letters from around the world. He said later that most of them made no sense to him, then or ever. He never claimed to have photographed an alien. He never claimed anything. He only ever said the picture was real and he could not explain it. And the case never died. Most strange photos fade after a season or two. This one did the opposite. It rolled from newspapers into books, then into television specials, then onto the internet, where it found a second life bigger than the first. Search the Solway Firth Spaceman today, and you get tens of thousands of pages. Articles, blog posts, forum threads, video after video, all of them circling the same single frame from 1964. Half of them claim to have solved it. The other half insist it can never be solved. Dr. David Clark, the folklore expert who later took the case apart, said it plainly. He called it one of the most impressive unexplained images in the history of the subject, and he predicted people would still be arguing about it 50 years on. He was right. A photo of a little girl in a new dress became one of the most stubborn mysteries of the century. For decades, no one could do any better than baffled. To understand why this photo survived 60 years, you have to understand what people were actually looking at. Line the figure up next to Elizabeth and the trouble starts. The figure stands behind and to the side of her, higher up, turned away from the camera. It looks distant. It looks too tall. And it seems impossible that a normal person, standing that far back, could have legs reaching all the way down to the ground the way the figure seems to. That single detail kept the alien theory alive for years. If the figure were a real human being standing where it appears to stand, believers argued, that person would have to be close to 10 feet tall. No adult on that marsh was 10 feet tall, so the figure could not be a person. So it had to be something else. The logic was clean, and it was wrong, but you needed the right tools to see why. There was a reason the eye kept getting fooled. The figure sits well behind Elizabeth, out of focus, on the far side of the sharp part of the image. In photography, anything at a different distance from the main subject blurs, and blur erases the fine edges your brain uses to judge size and shape. So the figure lost its outlines. Its arms melted into its body. Its proportions turned soft and unreadable. You were never looking at a clear person. You were looking at a smear the shape of one, and your mind filled in the rest with the most dramatic option available. In 1964, the most dramatic option was a man from space. The shoulders were another problem. The figure looked broad and blocky, nothing like the slight build of Annie Templeton. And then there was the piece that beat everyone, the head. A dark area sat where a face should be, framed by a bright white dome curving over the top. Together, they looked exactly like a helmet with a tinted visor. That helmet was the wall. You could argue about the height. You could argue about the distance. But the helmet sat there in every version of the photo, white and round and solid, and nobody had a good reason for it. Annie had dark brown hair, so the dark patch could be the back of her head. Fine. But she was not wearing anything white on her head that day. She did not have white hair. There was no scarf, no hat, no hood. So where did the dome come from? For 48 years, that question had no answer. Every explanation that started strong arrived at the helmet and fell apart. The figure could be explained as a person, right up until the moment you had to explain what was sitting on top of its head. Then you were stuck. It took until 2012 for someone to knock down most of the wall. Dr. David Clark is a folklore expert and a professor at Sheffield Hallam University. In 2012, he took a serious look at the Solway case, and he noticed something almost everyone had missed. There was a second photo from that day. The quality was terrible, a copy of a copy, but it showed part of Annie Templeton standing on the marsh. And in it, you can see what she was wearing. A pale blue dress, sleeveless, cut high on the shoulders, leaving her arms bare. Clark looked at the Spaceman figure and saw the same thing. Bare arms, a dress, a body that suddenly looked a lot less like a spacesuit and a lot more like a woman in summer clothes. His conclusion was simple. The Spaceman was Annie. But that raised an obvious problem. Jim always insisted his wife was behind him when he took the shot, not in front of the camera. Clark had an answer for that too, and it came down to the camera itself. Jim was using a type of camera where the viewfinder did not show the full frame. Look through the eyepiece, and you saw only part of what the lens actually captured, somewhere around 70%. So Annie could have drifted into the edge of the shot, into the part of the scene Jim's eye never checked, and he would have pressed the shutter without ever seeing her there. The camera caught what the man behind it could not. That explained the biggest mystery of all. It explained how a figure appeared that Jim swore was not there. The rest started to fall into place. It was a sunny day, and the photo was overexposed, which washed the figure out to a pale, almost white color. That killed the spacesuit. Her dark hair stayed dark at the back, which is why that patch reads like a visor. Clark argued Annie had simply turned her back to the camera and walked into the frame. It was the best explanation anyone had ever offered, and a lot of people still refuse to believe it. Go to any forum where the case gets discussed, and you will find the same complaints year after year. The figure looks too tall, the shoulders look too broad, the legs do not reach the ground the way a real person's would. But mostly, people came back to the helmet, because Clark had explained the arms, the dress, the color, and the way Annie appeared without Jim seeing her. He had explained almost everything. What he had not explained was the white dome. That bright curve over the top of the head still sat there, unaccounted for, and as long as it did, the door stayed open. The believers held onto that dome, and they were not entirely wrong too. Here is the part nobody had tried before. Start with the original photo, the way it actually sits, and one thing gets in the way. Elizabeth. She stands in the foreground and blocks most of the figure's body, which makes it impossible to judge how far back the figure really is, or how tall it really stands. You cannot read the depth of the scene when the main subject is covering half of it. So the honest way to test any theory is to take the photo apart. Rebuild the marsh as a blank canvas. Drop Elizabeth back into place and check her against the original. She matches. Add the figure back in and check again. It matches. Now the image is faithful to what Jim shot, but it can be moved around, which the original never could. Move Elizabeth aside, and the figure changes completely. With the little girl no longer blocking the view, you can finally see where the figure stands in relation to the horizon and the grassy bank behind it. It is closer than it looked. Now go back to that second photo of Annie, the blurry one. In it, her arms are bare all the way up to the shoulder, and the dress is that pale summer blue. Carry those details onto the figure, give the arms a little color, return the dress to blue, and the spacesuit disappears. What overexposure had bleached into a solid white shape becomes a woman's sleeveless dress and two bare arms, distinct from her body, exactly as they should be. The height stops looking impossible, too. Once Elizabeth is out of the way, the legs reach the ground the way any normal person's would, and the figure meets the grassy bank at a believable spot. The 10-foot giant was never real. It was a trick of a blocked view and a blurred edge. Everything fits. Except the head. The dome is still there. Bright, round, sitting over Annie's dark hair, and off to the side of it. And that forces a strange question. Could there be something white and circular lined up directly behind her head? Something round enough to look like a helmet, sitting in the exact spot where a helmet would be? Something in the sky, white and round, visible in the middle of the day? The moon. On the 23rd of May, 1964, the moon was in its waxing gibbous phase. That is the stage between a half-moon and a full moon, when more than half the surface is lit, but it has not filled out completely. Records for that date put it above 90% illuminated. It was almost full. A moon that bright is easy to see in daylight. People spot a waxing gibbous moon in the afternoon all the time, usually low in the sky, sitting at a shallow angle not long after it rises. At this phase, the moon climbs into the eastern sky in the late afternoon and hangs there while the sun is still up. It often sits low, somewhere between 10 and 20 degrees above the horizon, which is exactly the height a distant figure's head reaches in a photo taken across flat marshland. Bright, nearly full, and sitting low behind the family as Jim aimed his camera, which puts a glowing white disc at roughly head height in the background on the one afternoon this photo was taken. Now line it up. Shrink that nearly full moon down to how it would look in the distance, and slide it behind the figure's head. Soften it, because everything that far back in the photo is out of focus, the same way the clouds are. Then slot it into place behind Annie. The dome appears. Not a helmet. The moon, glowing through the blur, sitting right where her head was. That is why the dome had no earthly source, because it was not on Annie at all. It was 240,000 miles behind her. Jim happened to press the shutter at the one moment her head crossed in front of the moon from where he was standing. The bright disk peeked out over the top of her hair and around the side, and across 60 years, that overlap read as a helmet and a visor. Take the moon back out, and you are left with a small, ordinary-looking head. Put the moon back in, and the illusion snaps into place. Give the figure the back of a normal woman's head, the part the moon was hiding, and the whole body falls into proportion. The shoulders stop looking broad. The height stops looking wrong. The spaceman becomes a woman in a blue dress, standing under an afternoon moon. This is the piece Clark never had. He proved the figure was Annie. He could not prove what sat on her head. The moon was the missing answer, sitting in plain sight the entire time, in a sky nobody thought to check, on a date the calendar could confirm down to the exact phase. The wall that stood for 60 years came down over one alignment. Case closed. So here is what happened on the 23rd of May, 1964. Jim Templeton took a photo of his daughter picking flowers on Berg Marsh. His wife Annie wandered into the frame behind Elizabeth, walking away from the camera, wearing the same pale blue sleeveless dress from another photo that same day. Jim never saw her step into the shot because his camera's viewfinder only showed him about 70% of the scene, and she was standing in the part he could not see. The bright sun overexposed the image and washed her out to near white, which is why she looks like she is wearing a suit. Her dark hair stayed dark at the back of her head, which is why it looks like a visor. And in the exact instant Jim pressed the shutter, her head lined up with a nearly full moon sitting low in the afternoon sky. That is the dome. That is the helmet nobody could explain. 5 things stacked in one frame. A wife who walked into a shot her husband could not fully see. A dress that matched the figure. A sun that bleached her white. Dark hair that framed a false visor. And a moon in the one place that could turn a woman's head into a helmet. No aliens. No cloaking device. No cover-up by men who would not give their names. Just a father, a camera, and a run of bad luck that took 6 decades to untangle. The photo was always real. Kodak was right about that. The negative was never faked, and Jim never lied. He genuinely did not see anyone behind his daughter, and he spent the rest of his life honestly baffled by what came back from the developer. He was telling the truth. He just did not have all the pieces. Now they are all on the table. The Solway Firth spaceman was Annie Templeton, standing under the moon, caught in a photo her own husband did not know he was taking. The mystery that traveled the world pulled in Kodak, drew 2 men in suits to a fireman's door, and got tangled up with a rocket test in Australia, comes down to a coincidence of light and timing on one quiet English marsh. The real explanation is much simpler and involves normal photography mistakes. Jim was using an old camera that had a limited viewfinder. This viewfinder only showed about 70% of the actual picture area. Because of this limitation, Jim could not see his wife, Annie, standing right behind their daughter when he clicked the button. Annie was wearing a light blue dress and had her back turned to the camera. It was a very bright, sunny afternoon. The intense sunlight overexposed the film and washed out the blue color of her dress, making it look bright white in the final print. From behind, her dark, short hair looked just like the dark visor of a space helmet. This famous optical illusion happened because several ordinary factors lined up perfectly at the same moment. The camera settings, the bright sun, and a wife walking slightly out of her husband's line of sight created a phantom figure. No supernatural events occurred on that hill. After 6 decades of mystery, the famous spaceman is revealed to be a mother enjoying an ordinary weekend walk in the park.